So it is 11 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be joined by you and see everyone's faces this morning. My name is Maggie Dixon. I am the Home Visiting Coordination Initiative Development Coordinator at Prevent Child Abuse New York, and I head up the webinar component of the initiative. I am just going to give a few quick housekeeping points before I turn it over to our speakers for our presentation this morning. So this meeting, as you just heard from the voice alerting you, is recorded. I'd like to remind you to please mute yourselves and keep your cameras off during the presentation just to kind of keep the focus on the speakers. Closed captioning services are available today. If you head to the bottom of your screen and hover over the closed caption button, there's an option to turn on subtitles. Additionally, the HVCI is funded under the Preschool Development Grant, so PDG B5 grant, and a component of this grant is data collection. So after this webinar, I will be sending you a follow-up email as a participant, and there will be a survey link. We ask that you please fill out the survey to give us feedback so we can hand that over to our partners at the Center for Human Services Research. In the follow-up email, I'll also be including a link to the recording, which is housed on the HVCI website and YouTube channel, as well as a copy of today's slides and any supporting resources the presenters might mention. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Jamie and Claire to discuss the role of the Child Advocacy Center in prevention. And we're spotlighting the New York State Children's Alliance to discuss their role in interacting and supporting families. So Jamie and Claire, so happy to have you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maggie. We, both Claire and I are very thrilled to be here this morning in our recent collaboration with Prevent Child Abuse New York, and really want to thank Maggie and Jen for having us here with all of you, as well as thanking those of you who are on the call this morning, because it is July, summertime, which is really tough to then sit in on a training, as well as I think most people are zoomed out. So kudos to all of you for being here this morning. So my name is Jamie Bolton, and I am the Education and Training Coordinator with NISCA. Claire.
Hi, everybody. I'm Claire Robinson Henry, and I am the Director of Statewide Programming for NISCA.
So NISCA, the acronym for the New York State Children's Alliance, oversees the child advocacy centers in New York State. So we provide training, support, and technical assistance to all of the child advocacy centers in the state, which we'll be talking about today. But while we have very specific things that we do, ultimately, if there's anything that a CAC needs, we're there for them. If they have questions about programs, need something for their actual center, issues with a case, anything and everything, that's what our organization does, is to help them out. If at any point you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll do our best to respond. But at the same time, we will leave questions at the end, so you can also put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So first and foremost, just an idea of how many of you have heard of a child advocacy center. If you can just quick in the chat, say yep or nope, or CAC, as you'll see. Yes, good, yes, yes. Oh, look at all these yeses. This is fantastic. That's so great. Really glad to see that, because a lot of times people are like, no. So it is good to see that you have at least heard of a CAC, and really what we're going to be talking about today is the purpose, who's really involved, and what is actually being done at the CAC, because a lot of times folks have heard of it but then don't really quite understand the role of the CAC. So just to give some statistics, we know that 5 children die every day as a result of abuse and neglect. And we also know that every 8 minutes a child is sexually abused in the US. 90% of children are abused by somebody that they know, love, and trust. So growing up in the era of stranger danger, you know, don't get into the van with the guy who has the candy. We know that's not the case, that these are very complicated situations where alleged offenders, you know, their grooming behaviors, they really infiltrate with the child and the family. And so again, it's going to be someone that the child knows, loves, and trusts. And we also know that in New York State, that 90% is actually higher. It's more like 95 of the cases being seen. We also know that 1 in 10 children will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. And that statistic is based on children who are disclosing. We also know that there are plenty of kiddos who've not made that disclosure yet. So this is huge. And we are going to get into some of the numbers in New York State as well. So this is Bud, and he is he's like the original CAC guy. We really like this photo of him, and he was the one, so he was a district attorney in Alabama. And he recognized that social service departments and criminal justice departments weren't working together to meet the needs of the family. So you have this already very stressful and traumatic situation. It's very confusing. People aren't on the same page. And he's like, whoa, 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 this isn't going to help the families out. So he really was the one to spearhead putting the CAC model together to have all of these different agencies effectively communicate and work together. Quite frankly, I've been in this field for over 10 years now, and it probably wasn't even until very recently that I learned about who he is. So now I just feel like it's kind of important to give him kudos and props when we share about the amazing work that CACs are doing. So that is Bud.
Awesome. And so Jamie alluded to what would happen without a Child Advocacy Center. And when we're talking about the Child Advocacy Center, we're really talking about the physical space at which a multidisciplinary team works out of on these cases. And without the benefit of a CAC, a child may have to speak about one of the worst experiences of their lives to multiple people at agencies that I'm sure you know are not always child friendly or even people friendly. And they would have to go to multiple agencies and seek out healing from mental health professionals on their own without maybe the benefit of any advocate. And so all of those disciplines also are not necessarily great at talking to one another if they're just left to their own devices. So, however, at the Child Advocacy Center, the idea is that the team is all there in some form or another. Some of our CACs are completely co-located, meaning there is a representative from every one of the disciplines that is essential to the investigation and the assessment and everything. And some of them have linkage agreements with other professionals. And so the CAC is a place where the child and family can come, and it is ideally a one-stop shop. Sometimes kiddos might be referred to therapy off-site, but many of our CACs, and this is a really great thing, have therapy on-site, have medicals on site. If they're not emergencies, maybe a kid might have to go to a hospital if it's an emergent sexual or physical abuse exam. And also, most importantly, that forensic interview can happen there, and there can be coordination of the team. Somebody at each county is in charge of coordinating all the members of that team so that they talk together and share all the information about a case that is needed. So we can go to the next slide. This is a short video from our national partner, the National Children's Alliance. They accredit CACs across New York State and the country, and I think even have a few internationally now. There's some in Canada that I know about. And this video just sort of hammers home what happens at the CAC. And while we're on the topic of NCA, in New York State, the CACs are also monitored by the Office of Children and Family Services and funded by them. So let's play.
A Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, provides support to victims of child abuse. Without a CAC, an abused child may have to tell their story over and over again in settings that may be scary or where kids may think that they're in trouble. Then, families have to search around for the services their children need, all on their own. But in a CAC, a child tells their story to a trained interviewer who makes the process gentle on the child and finds the facts which are crucial to the child's case. Then, a community of professionals in medicine, law enforcement and child protective services, prosecution, victim advocacy, and other heroes work through the CAC to decide the best way to help the child. And CACs provide science-backed mental health care that heals kids from trauma and helps them reclaim their futures. This community of caring professionals rallies around the child so children have everything they need, all in one place, at the CAC. To find your local CAC or to sign up for updates, visit nationalchildren'salliance.org.
So as I was practicing and preparing for this presentation, I watched that video a bunch of times, and I had not realized quite how gender normative it is. Like, the police is a man and the CPS is a lady. I swear that isn't always the case, even though that's stereotypically what happens. I love the NCA. That is not reflective of my feelings about the NCA. I was just noticing that on the video. So you might be wondering how a case comes to the Child Advocacy Center. I bet probably a lot of you have heard of mandated reporters or are mandated reporters. In New York State, mandated reporters might be from most healthcare professionals, professionals who work in schools, police, people who work in courts, various types of counselors, folks who work in daycare and foster care. All of them are mandated reporters, and by New York State law are required to report suspected child abuse or maltreatment when they are, quote, presented with reasonable cause to suspect child abuse or maltreatment in a situation where the alleged perpetrator is a caregiver or person legally responsible for the abuse, and when that mandated reporter is acting in their official capacity. Of course, mandated reporters can make calls when they're not on duty, and there are options for folks, regular folks, to also make calls of reporting abuse, and those calls go to the State Central Register, or SCR, which we often will just call the hotline. And there are a couple of different hotlines that cover, like, New York City. So you might see an ACS hotline. It's also to report child abuse. And the different mandated reporters are required to report suspected physical, sexual abuse, maltreatment, witness to domestic violence, also sometimes some other community violence, and now more recently, commercial sexual exploitation of children, which we will often call CSEC. So if you hear me say that, that's what that's referring to. That includes sexual imagery of children. We try not to say child porn anymore. So like, sexual imagery of children is one longer way of saying that. And then also child sex trafficking. And so the call would be accepted by the SCR, and by law, child advocacy centers are supposed to see cases of child sexual abuse and severe physical abuse. So that's like, those definitely have to go to a child advocacy center, but our CACs and our network see all of these different types of abuse. And thank you. Perfect. So once the call is made, then the system responses start kicking into gear. So CPS is, again, that alleged perpetrator is somebody who's responsible for the child. The SCR may also choose to send a report to law enforcement, and so they make an LER, or law enforcement referral, and that's when the alleged perpetrator is not a parent or there's something criminally involved with this case. There are cases where both CPS and law enforcement are involved, though the vast majority of CAC cases are child welfare heavy, and they end up going to family court, not always to criminal court. CPS, their role is really to assess the health and safety of the child and or children in the home, and they are supposed to be doing that within 24 hours. And then making any recommendations and assessing whether the caregiver is able to provide for the child. Law enforcement, their role is public safety. And so they might make an arrest or not. They would be, sometimes they both will go out. In some counties, there are IRTs, or instant response teams, in which both systems go out together in response to a case. And either way, what happens ideally is that one of the systems, whoever is most involved, will bring the child who is supposed to be seen at the Child Advocacy Center to the Child Advocacy Center for a forensic interview as soon as possible, after a report has been made and accepted. So we can go to the next slide.
Oh, well,
Jamie, yeah, please.
Yeah, so basically, when in doubt, just call the hotline. You don't need to work through, well, who's the alleged perpetrator? Or, you know, I'm not fully aware, that sort of thing. If you have a concern, just call the hotline. They're the professionals. They're going to be the ones to let you know, yes, this falls under Child Protective Services, or no, we are going to do a law enforcement referral. And as mandated reporters, you have the right to follow up and ask, you know, how is this being handled? Not the details, but, you know, is it being accepted? If it's not being accepted, why? As well as, should the case get closed, you do have the right to follow up and get some information about that. Doesn't mean you're going to get, you know, all the details, but that is your right as a mandated reporter. So this is how these cases get to the Child Advocacy Center, but we just like to let people know, when in doubt, make the call. Don't worry too much about these details.
And of course, if there's immediate danger, call 911. And then the law enforcement will do their thing for public safety. Also, I was going to say that if you are a mandated reporter, and it's been a little while since you've had your mandated reporting training, we do offer a less is more training, which is really just sort of intended to be a refresher for mandated reporters who maybe haven't had to, luckily haven't had to make a call lately or anything like that. So we can always send Maggie and Jen the information about our next offering of that. So CACs in New York State cover all but one of our counties, and they cover all urban, rural, suburban areas, even some military installations, and multiple tribal nations. I believe it's 6 federally recognized tribal nations in the state. And that one of the tribal nations has a CAC on tribal land that is operated by tribal law enforcement and child welfare, which is pretty cool. We are one of the only states one of a very small handful of states that has a CAC on a tribal reservation. And that one's way up next to Canada. These CACs serve roughly 23,000 children each year. That's in a normal year. Last year, the official number was more around 19,000. And that, of course, was not because child abuse slowed down, but it was a lack of contact with mandated reporters, which I forgot to mention is probably one of the population that most reports come from, I think, in New York State and nationally. And in 2018, 89 children died due to abuse and neglect in New York State. That number is obviously a little bit old, but New York State puts out these reports they'll review every child death and make a determination about what happened. And you can find those reports on the OCFS website. And again, sorry, a little bit of an older number. Hopefully we'll have better numbers soon, because more of the children who are trafficked or at risk for trafficking will be coming to child advocacy centers. And so in 2018, roughly 2,000 children were identified as trafficked or at risk for trafficking in only about half of the counties served by the New York State Safe Harbor program. So check back for better numbers later, possibly beginning of next year. And if you are interested in learning more about sex trafficking and prevention, definitely check out the Safe Harbor program, because they have been doing this for many years in New York State. All right.
Awesome. CACs also just got a new database for keeping track of data. So we again, we'll have those better numbers, because now data is going to be getting tracked in a more efficient way, which is really good for everyone. All right, so Claire did an awesome job just kind of going through how cases really come to be. So a mandated reporter has a concern, they call the hotline then makes the referral to the appropriate agency. So now we're talking about the Child Advocacy Center itself, who's involved, and kind of what each person really does. Very important, so you can kind of see on the screen, we have everybody that we know of. There could be more folks involved, but these are typically the players, and reception is even an important part of that, because when these families are walking in, it's a very stressful time. So we want to make sure that we give kudos to the receptionist as well, who plays a role in making sure that children and their family are okay and feeling safe and having what they need. But you'll see there's victim advocates on site, you'll have child protective workers on site, law enforcement, it might be county or city law enforcement, as well as some CACs have a New York State trooper. Prosecution plays a role. Some CACs have medical on site, mental health, those CSEC advocates. Some CACs also are able to offer prevention education, and then some CACs have a fund development person as well. So there are a lot of players that can be housed within the CAC. Now, with that being said, of course, not every child advocacy center looks the same in the state. You will have some that have all of these people and more located in their building, or you might have a child advocacy center where they have child protective services and victim advocates on site, but their law enforcement isn't co-located. Some CACs are able to offer medical and mental health on site, some are not. So please keep in mind that, you know, when we are talking about this, we will be talking about it as if everyone is there, but again, not all CACs look like that. Some CACs have mobile units, are quite literally in an RV in those more rural counties. trekking out to meet the family where they feel comfortable if the family can't get to the center. That has been a really exciting new development within the past few years and has actually been really successful. So the idea that everyone's located in this nice, beautiful home, you know, while it's great and a lot of them are, that is not always the case. All right, so just going to kind of walk you through what actually happens when a child and their family arrives at the Child Advocacy Center. So when the case is referred to Child Protective or law enforcement, someone's going to reach out to the family, either the detective or the caseworker, and say, okay, you know, depending on the situation, it might be, can you come in tomorrow? Can you come in later today? Or could you come in next week? Here is the address and the time that we'll be meeting you. So a child and their family arrives. They will be greeted by the receptionist, again, very important person. Make sure that they're okay. And then a victim advocate will first be coming and meeting with the family to say, you know, hi, I'm so-and-so. Going to kind of be that consistent face for the day. Is there anything that you need? Here are the next steps, which will typically involve law enforcement or child protective services meeting with those non-offending caregivers first, and then providing the forensic interview. So before the child has arrived, all of these players, you know, have met briefly to just get on the same page. Okay, here's the situation. Here's what our concerns are. So everyone's on the same page, and that victim advocate is really going to be one of those first people to be in touch with the family. So going to make sure that everyone's okay, again, has what they need. This is also a child and friendly environment. So typically the waiting room is going to have coloring books and toys, sometimes have a TV or a fish tank, but anything to make that child feel more comfortable. So after all of that, kind of more basic housekeeping sort of things are done, then the detective or caseworker, again, will meet with that non-offending caregiver, get some more background information, and then they will go ahead and conduct the forensic interview with the child.
Thanks, Jamie. So the forensic interview is really a structured conversation with the child that is intended to elicit detailed information about the events or multiple events that the child may have experienced or witnessed. And ideally, interviews are conducted at the CAC. There are some cases where it can't happen. We've had a lot of that in the last year, depending on people's COVID responses. But ideally, they're at the CAC with a trained, experienced professional. In New York State, interviewers might either be independent, which means that they are not part of one of the investigatory disciplines. So they're not CPS or law enforcement, or some of our counties rely heavily on either CPS or law enforcement to do the forensic interview. There are several guidelines that New York State interviewers use that are all forensically sound, and they focus on trauma narrative. So, or sorry, not trauma narrative, narrative practice. That's mental health later. So the narrative practice, which allows for getting the necessary information in a way that does not re-traumatize the child. That's one of the main intentions of the interview, to not trigger the child. Other members of the team who are not doing the forensic interview will generally be viewing it via like a closed circuit TV system. And most counties right now in New York record their interviews, and with the child and family's knowledge that it's happening. That recording is very important for peer review for forensic interviewers, and if one of the team members is not able to be there at the time of the interview, they can look back at it. It's a practice that's been evolving in this state, but we're actually a little bit behind the curve. A lot of states already just regularly record because it's an important thing. there are so many standards that revolve around the forensic interview because decades ago, things were done really badly. And they, like, cases of sexual abuse had, you know, law enforcement, it was bad. There are a couple of interviewers that are still with us in New York State who talk about all the different reasons why there are so many rules and expectations of the forensic interview because of how it used to be done. And these are ever evolving based on research on child development and recall, all of those things. So we can go to the next slide.
Right, so victim advocacy. So while the forensic interview is taking place, a victim advocate is typically going to meet with a non-offending caregiver to, again, talk more about how the day is going to proceed, answer any questions they might have, and then, of course, make any referrals that a child and their family might need. The victim advocate is really going to be that consistent face throughout the entire process. So if law enforcement's involved and they make an arrest, you know, they're kind of like, okay, we're out. That advocate's going to stay the entire time. So after the arrest has been done, you know, continue to keep them updated on what's going on. So the relationship begins when the family first comes to the CAC, but advocates can be working with a family for months or even sometimes years, making sure that the family has the services they need. So oftentimes, the two referrals that they might make right off the bat will be for mental health services as well as a medical exam. So they'll talk and share that information with the non-offending caregivers to get that set up, let them know more details about it. And then if there's other services the family might need, for example, if the alleged offender, you know, the family is living in the alleged offender's home and they now need to leave and they're concerned about finding housing, or if a child needs to now switch school districts, the advocates can help them to get all of that set up. It's an amazing group of people and the work that they do and how they support the families. They also have to go through extensive training, updated training yearly with all different types of topics related to being trauma informed. Things I know someone put in the comments about, you know, recognizing implicit bias and that sort of thing. Like those are topics that our advocates are aware of and get training on as things continue to evolve. So. Medical. Claire, you're good if I take this? I know you said so, but yeah. All right, so like I said, victim advocates will often make the referral for the medical exam. Even so, if a child discloses that the abuse, you know, took place 2 years ago, chances are there might not be evidence found, but at the same time, maybe it also happened more recently. They're just not sharing it. But it's just going to be important to have the medical exam done for a number of reasons. First and foremost, to see if possibly there could be medical evidence, although we know in most cases there will not be. But it's also really important for a child and their family to hear that their body is safe and healthy, which can actually be a very important part of the healing process for that child. So when a medical exam is done, it's really just like going to any other doctor's appointment. So they'll make that referral, a child and their family will go. They might, you know, have to share some medical background while they're there. And then the doctor or the same nurse will do an exam, a regular head to toe. They're going to look in the eyes, ears, throat, you know, listen to their heart, and then we'll look at the private areas of their body. It is a non-invasive exam, so they're not doing anything internally, but they will be looking to see if there are signs of trauma, and they are able to offer treatment options as well. So if a child has an STD or something else, they'll be able to offer any medical things for that to make sure that the child is going to be healthy. So again, even if the abuse has taken place a while ago, or if it's more recently, but there's still no signs of trauma, it's just really important for them to hear that their bodies are healthy. Claire, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just a couple of things. For physical abuse, especially as we have seen an increase in it, the medical exam is also super important, just to pick up on not an emergency physical abuse, because that would hopefully be at the hospital, but something like sentinel injuries, bruises, other things that might not be seen but might point to chronic physical abuse. The medical exam is so important for that as well. That, you know, maybe the interviewers don't even know that there could be physical abuse going on as well for children. And for some children, this is honestly one of the only medical appointments they might get in a while. So even that can be really important. And then they get some referrals to dentists or other like a regular general practice pediatrician that can take care of them more long term. So it's super important. Oh, and that's me. Sorry. So mental health is also a vital part of this. It's a vital part of healing for children and families. Many CACs are fortunate, like I said, to have professional mental health folks on staff or on site, and then others are contracted out. CACs by OCFS and NCA are expected to offer evidence-based trauma-informed therapy modalities, including TFCBT. Forgive this alphabet soup that I'm about to throw at you. So that's trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's probably one of the most commonly used modalities in the state. Many people mix this with EMDR and DBT, and then some of our bigger child advocacy centers who have larger volumes will use something called the Child and Family Traumatic Stress Intervention, or CFTSI. That is a short-term intensive treatment that was created by folks at Yale. And they have sessions that are with the child and with the caregiver. So they both get to be part of the healing at the same time. And we can move on to prosecution. Representative from the county's district attorney's offices and legal services for the county, which are the ones that are involved with CPS or ACS here in New York City. They are also important parts of the MDT, even if a case doesn't go to criminal court. Assisted district attorneys are present at interviews usually to hopefully make a determination on whether a case can proceed through criminal court. County attorneys or corporation counsel in New York City, they prosecute cases in family court where the respondent or the alleged perpetrator is a juvenile. And we have many cases like that, which are unfortunately child against child. And then ADAs, they will generally try to get a plea deal from the alleged perpetrator, the defendant, because they would rather not have a child's case go to trial. But if that does not happen, then an ADA will help, ideally help prepare children and families and let them know what they would need to do for a grand jury and then ultimately trial. And ideally would be working with the advocate still as they go through trial.
So some of our CACs are able to offer prevention education, which is huge because someone once explained it to me that when you think of child abuse and specifically these cases, it's like these kids and they're just running and they're falling off a cliff and the CAC is at the bottom of the cliff. They've already fallen, but thankfully there's a place for them to go and get the help that they need. Prevention education is someone standing at the top of the cliff trying to make sure that the kids aren't falling off, that they're getting the information that they need so that should something happen, that they can speak up sooner, or they're kind of getting that weird feeling that they're able to tell someone and do something about it. So hopefully that this doesn't happen. So there's really prevention education work done being for kids and adults. So for adults, you might have heard of programs like Darkness to Light, which are these trainings that give in-depth knowledge as to knowing the signs and symptoms, what to look for, what are grooming behaviors, those sorts of things, how to even handle a disclosure. So that way, they can be on the lookout, making sure that they're helping the kiddos. But then at the same time, it's really important that the kids themselves know some do's and don'ts in situations as well, that they know that if they get that feeling in their tummy, they should tell someone, recognizing those safe adults. So on the right, you see Aaron's Law was recently passed in New York State, which makes it required for public schools to offer child abuse prevention educations in ages kindergarten through 8, which is really fantastic. A lot of school districts will partner with their local Child Advocacy Center, who will then provide those safety education programs. But if they're not able to, there are some really fantastic programs out there that the schools can provide themselves. But it's important work that needs to be done so that ideally this will not be happening. Kids are resilient. It's really important that, we're kind of talking about some really, and yes, someone just said the Enough Abuse campaign. Of course. Thank you. It's really important that while we are talking about something so heavy, that it's important to remember that kids are resilient. When they get that support, when they get those services, when they simply just get someone saying to them, I believe you, I'm proud of you for sharing this, you're so brave, that can make a world of difference. And kids can come out the other side and be healthy and happy and have fantastic relationships, when they do get that support that they need. And that's what the CACs are here for. And they're doing really some incredible work helping these children and families moving from this place of extreme stress and uncertainty to a place of resiliency and knowing that they will be okay. You all can make a difference yourselves, whether it's just being a part of this training today and learning more information. That in itself can make a difference, because then you can share with other people, hey, have you ever heard of a CAC and the work they do? Or being a mandated reporter and when you have that concern, when you are worried that something's taking place, picking up the phone and making that call. You certainly could also reach out to your local Child Advocacy Center if you have a concern, and kind of, talk with a victim advocate about what your next step should be, which, is likely going to be to call the hotline. But you do have the CAC as a resource as well. So all of you here today, thank you so much for being here and being a part of this conversation and learning this information. And thank you all for the work that you do. And of course, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Claire. That was a really great overview and just a lot of information. I knew some of it, but it was a wonderful refresher. And I love how you framed kind of what happens from the referral and then walked us through when a child arrived and a family arrived at a Child Advocacy Center, because I knew some of the information, but the way you kind of framed it out and meticulously went through in detail was really helpful. So I encourage all of our participants to drop any questions you have or thoughts you have in the chat. But I'm going to start us off with a question that I had throughout your presentation, and any experience you have or anything you can speak to. So we've been having conversations at Prevent Child Abuse New York internally about all of the hotlines and warm lines and referral sources that exist in the state. There's quite a number of phone lines that you can call. And can you speak to your experience with CACs and their connections with these lines in New York State? Is the SCR kind of the predominant source of referrals, or is there any other source?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then Claire, feel free to jump in because it might be different. Claire's kind of our expert in the New York City area, and things are done a little bit differently down there because they're so awesome and there's a different need. So she's our in-house expert. But so there have been in the past, like for example, Onondaga County used to have their own county hotline number, but it would then get kicked to the SCR anyways. So it was really kind of, conversation started to be like, well, do we really even need this? Because ultimately, if you do have that concern of a child being abused, you should just call the state central registry. Though it might look a little different county by county, but ultimately that's who mandated reporters should be calling. And then those reports get sent to, essentially the Child Advocacy Center, to the Child Protective Service workers or DSS workers. And Claire, I don't know if there's anything a little different.
I don't know exactly how the ACS one works, but I suspect it's probably similar to what you were just talking about with the Onondaga County, because it would cover the 5 counties of New York, but ultimately the SCR is the main one. They're the ones who are making the determinations on whether they screen in or screen out, and all that good jazz. And then sending them to the appropriate county. Yeah. I can't tell you about the other like trafficking ones. There's a few trafficking things.
Yeah. There's like you'll get like a stack. I used to work at the Child Advocacy Center in Onondaga County. It would be like a stack like this that I had to put in a database of like, all of the information and how it's coded and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's ultimately how it's going to get to the CACs themselves.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. We're just kind of talking a lot about how the lines align with each other and how they refer to each other. So that's helpful though to know that SCR's relationship with the CACs. I also think
everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to be a part and offer support and services and help, which is great.
I'm still waiting. No one has entered any questions into the chat, but people are just kind of commenting. And I wanted to elevate Jen O'Connor's comment. She's the director of the HVCI and director of policy and advocacy at Prevent Child Abuse New York. But in the most recent budget, we passed kind of an addition to the mandated reporter training to update it to include training in adverse childhood experiences, implicit bias, and identifying child abuse in a virtual environment. So that's for mandated reporters, but I wanted to elevate that because I loved your kind of framing of the forensic interview and how it's trauma informed and resists re-traumatization. And I think it's important to kind of include that narrative in all steps of
absolutely
process.
Yes, we are very excited about that change and have been talking with Jen about it. Big fans of learning about ACEs and implicit bias in all of the systems in which we work. And there are quite a few that all touch CACs in some way.
We also, if anyone here right now is a mandated reporter and maybe it's been a minute since you've taken the training, or you're just kind of like, I just need a little bit of a refresher. At NISCA, we do offer a training called Less is More, which we have on demand. So sometimes we do live ones where you can see Claire and I again. But we do have an on-demand version that, again, goes through understanding your role as a mandated reporter, what to do if you have a concern, what to, the do's and don'ts if a child should make a disclosure to you, and then sometimes why it seems like nothing happens even after you made the call, because we know that can be really frustrating. You call the hotline, the child does go to the CAC, but it seems like nothing changes, and really understanding why that takes place. Someone asked if we could share the link. I will be sending it to Maggie, who will be sending it out to all of you.
Yes, absolutely. When you spoke about that earlier, I was like, oh, I think I want to even check that out for myself, because I think you would be able to speak more to this, and this is just my own lack of knowledge, I suppose. But once you take the mandated reporter training, you take it once, right? There's no follow-up. Okay.
I think for some medical providers, they have to do it again, but that is one of our perennial wishes to try to have it more regular. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Especially incorporating amendments. I feel as though we're constantly evolving and to incorporate information that's trauma informed, responsive to immigrant and refugee populations and ACEs and protective factors. And okay, someone has raised a hand. Brian?
Yeah, Jen, I wanted to mention this is a wonderful presentation, and Claire and Jamie, thank you so much for the information you provided. Got so much from it. The CAC, I did want to share with you, I had the distinct pleasure a number of years ago of going to New York City and observing the CAC when it was originally being formulated in the city. And I wanted to mention that it was nice of you to have the picture of Bud up there and kind of give us our roots in the involvement of it. But I wanted to mention another name. His name is Tom Hess. When you mentioned the aspect of the development and funding, oftentimes because we're busy with the work and getting things established and what have you. But Tom Hess was with DSS, and then when OCFS got founded, he was tremendously instrumental in seeing that CAC got established in New York State by seeing that the applications got presented and ran them through the governmental bureaucracy so that we could have them in as many districts as possible in New York State. And it was just wonderful. But they've been such an improvement in the system-wide. They've picked up on so many of the problems we were having in communication, where a child going through the system was being bumped, and so many critical pieces of information were getting dropped and exaggerated. And it was just a very awkward and inefficient way of helping a child and family heal. So it's great. And you presented in a very professional manner. Thanks so much, guys.
No
Brian,
problem.
I know who you are, but can you tell everybody else who you are? I think that's helpful information.
I'm sorry, Jen, were you asking me something?
Yeah, can you tell everybody who you are and what your background is? I think that's helpful for folks to know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jen. My name is Brian Barr, and I used to be Associate Deputy Commissioner at the Office of Children and Family Services, and was the head of special services. And one of my responsibilities was oversight of the New York State Central Register and Adult Protective Services and New York adoptions. So I did have some involvement in this piece of the work. And then prior to that, I was the clinical director at LaSalle School for some 30 years. I'm a social worker by training. And right now, I'm the president of Senior Hope Counseling, which is a outpatient treatment center for people 50 and over who are coping with alcohol and other substance abuse problems. Yeah.
That's
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Brian. Wow, I feel like that, you know, we have a legend amongst us.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, far from that, Jamie. Just one of the regular people trying to, you know, put my oar in the water and be as much help as possible. But I always get more from listening to people like you and others in trying to improve and do a little bit to be of service. So thanks for letting me join you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I did not get to meet Tom Hess, but I sure heard his name a lot when I first started here.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, it was a legend too.
Yeah, yes, a great contributor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His name is still brought up. People are like, oh,
good.
when Tom did this, or like, you know, so yeah, I think
Yeah.
he is missed.
Claire, very committed to the work.
Yeah.
You know, really believed in it, and he knew what a difference it would make for the children. And when I went to New York, and he introduced me to the concept, and I saw how well that team was working together, and how carefully they handled not just the physical aspect of things, but the child's feelings through the process. I was so pleased that people were tuned into that, and that the child was treated as a person with true dignity and worth. And it was like they were handling what they should be handling, a precious human being. And people were just so plugged into that part that it just couldn't help but make you feel proud that, yeah, this is what we signed on for. This is the way the work needs to be done. Yeah, it's great.
Well, if Claire and I didn't sell the CAC model, pretty sure Brian just did. So if you're not on board now, I don't know what to tell you. That really captured it.
Yeah, good.
Good. Perfect kind of conclusion to wrap us up there, Brian. But so I don't have any more questions in the chat at the moment, but I'm happy to send contact information for Claire and Jamie. And if anybody has any specific questions, you can shoot them a note. So it is 11:58 right now, I suppose, or almost 11:58. I can give people back a couple minutes in their day. I just want to thank Jamie and Claire again very much for this presentation. It was very helpful. And this will live on the HVCI website, so folks can go back and refer to it and send it out to your networks and view it at your leisure. So thank you very much. I suppose I can
listen to us ramble.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you so much.